Grandchildren abandon sick grandmother on the street in winter. 5 years later, they need to sell their mansion and discover that grandmother is the mysterious buyer. Gladys sat in her small apartment within the community center, her weathered face illuminated by the dim glow of the single lamp on the table beside her. The wind howled outside, sending gusts of snowflakes swirling against the windowpane. She peered out, her tired eyes tracing the chaotic dance of the white flakes as they fell relentlessly, blanketing the world in an icy embrace. It was as if the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her heart, a tempest of memories, regrets, and the biting chill of abandonment. Another storm, she muttered to herself, her voice barely rising above the sound of the wind. The walls of her apartment, adorned with faded photographs and remnants of a life once vibrant, felt more confining than ever. Gladys drew a shaky breath, her mind drifting back to the last time she had seen Ethan and Miranda. That day was etched in her memory like a scar, painful and raw, as if it had happened just yesterday. In her mind's eye, she could see them clearly. She had been bustling around her kitchen, a warm and welcoming haven filled with the rich aroma of her famous chicken casserole. The laughter of her grandchildren echoed through the halls, a melody she had cherished. Ethan, with his bright blue eyes and tousled hair, had been teasing Miranda about something trivial, their banter light and joyful. Gladys had watched them, her heart swelling with love and pride. "Can you help me set the table, Ethan?" she called out, her voice filled with warmth. "Sure, Grandma," he replied, bounding over with a grin that lit up his face. Miranda had entered the kitchen, rolling her eyes playfully. "Ethan, you're terrible at this. You have to put the forks on the left." Gladys chuckled, her heart full. "Just let him try, dear. Everyone has to learn sometime." But that warmth had been fleeting. The laughter had faded, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that settled over their family like a thick fog. On that fateful day, just before they left, she had sensed a hesitation, a reluctance in their voices. They had come to say goodbye, but it felt more like an ending than a simple farewell. "Grandma, we need to talk," Miranda had said, her voice trembling slightly as she sat down at the kitchen table, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Gladys had felt her heart drop. "What is it, sweetheart? You look so serious." Ethan had exchanged a glance with Miranda, his expression somber. "It's about us. About living here with you." "What do you mean?" Gladys had asked, her voice rising in pitch as confusion clouded her mind. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for us to go," Miranda had confessed, tears pooling in her eyes. The words had struck her like a physical blow. "Go? But why? I thought we were happy together." "I thought, Grandma, it's not that simple," Ethan had interjected, desperation creeping into his voice. "We love you, but we're adults now. We have our own lives to live." "Your own lives?" Gladys had echoed, a mix of disbelief and hurt flooding through her. "You're leaving me? After everything?" The disappointment and fear in her voice were palpable. She remembered the way Ethan had looked away, unable to meet her gaze, while Miranda had covered her face with trembling hands, choking on her sobs. The door had closed behind them with a finality that resonated in her chest, a sound that had marked the painful end of a chapter she had held dear. In that moment, the warmth of her kitchen had turned cold, the laughter replaced by the haunting silence of her solitude. She had collapsed to the floor, her heart shattering as the tears flowed freely. "Why?" she had cried out, the sound echoing in the empty space of her home. "Why are you leaving me?" Now, as she sat in the present, the snow continued to fall, a relentless reminder of the void in her life. The world outside her window felt distant, almost unreal, as if she were watching a movie through a glass screen. Gladys rubbed her tired eyes, willing away the tears that threatened to spill over once more. She had spent years fighting against the cold of loneliness, struggling through days that felt endless, and nights that brought an even deeper despair. But there was something about the snow that stirred a flicker of hope within her. It was beautiful in its own way, a chance for renewal. Perhaps, just perhaps, this storm could symbolize a fresh start. She had endured so much, and yet here she was, alive and determined. The thought of her grandchildren filled her with warmth, even as the ache of their absence gnawed at her heart. They were her blood, her legacy, and she wanted nothing more than to mend the rift between them. Gladys stood up, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her. She walked over to a small table in the corner of her living room, where a delicate floral arrangement sat, wilting but still vivid against the muted backdrop of her apartment. She picked up a faded photograph of the three of them, taken on a summer day years ago. They had been at the park, laughing and playing, the sun shining brightly overhead. "Look at us, my loves," she whispered, tracing a finger over their smiling faces. "I miss you both so much." Her heart ached, but she knew she had to find a way to reach out to them. Perhaps the snow was a sign, a chance to break the ice that had formed between them. Gladys turned back to the window, her eyes scanning the horizon of white. She could feel the stirrings of a plan taking shape in her mind, something bold and transformative. "I will not be forgotten," she declared softly, her voice steadying with resolve. "I will show them that love endures, that family can be rebuilt, no matter how deep the scars run." In that moment, the howling wind outside felt less menacing, more like a call to action. Gladys made her way back to the table, picking up her pen and a sheet of paper. She would write to them, a letter filled with her hopes, her dreams, and her deep yearning for reconciliation. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. As she began to write, the wind continued to rage, but within her, a fire ignited. The warmth of her love for Ethan and Miranda began to thaw the icy grip of despair, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The storm outside might be fierce, but within her, the seeds of change were beginning to take root. Gladys was ready to face whatever came next, to embrace the future with open arms, and to reclaim her place in the hearts of her grandchildren. Ethan and Miranda stood in the vast, echoing emptiness of the mansion that had once been their family's sanctuary. The air was thick with dust, and the shadows of the past loomed large, wrapping around them like a heavy shroud. The grand staircase, the ornate chandeliers, and the faded wallpaper whispered secrets of laughter, love, and ultimately, loss. As the biting wind howled outside, the siblings exchanged glances, their hearts weighed down by a mix of nostalgia and guilt. "I can't believe it's come to this," Ethan said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, trying to tame the chaos that mirrored his thoughts. "We're actually selling it." Miranda turned away from the dusty old portraits that lined the walls, her fingers tracing the edge of a table that had once been polished to a shine. "It feels wrong, Ethan. This house. It was our childhood. How could we just let it go?" Ethan sighed, his blue eyes reflecting the conflict within him. "I know. But what choice do we have? We can't afford to keep it, and it's just too much to handle. Besides, we haven't lived here in years. We can't keep holding on to the past." "But it's not just a building to me," Miranda replied, her voice trembling slightly. His voice steady, although his heart raced. The woman's expression softened, and she nodded. "She's in the meeting room, but I must warn you, she's been through a lot lately." Miranda's heart sank. "Thank you," she managed to say, her throat tightening. As they walked down the corridor, the sound of laughter and chatter grew louder. Ethan and Miranda exchanged nervous glances, each step feeling heavier than the ultimo. They reached the door and paused, their hands hovering over the knob. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Miranda nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, Ethan turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Gladys sat at the front, her hair silver and her face lined with the wisdom of her years. Her expression shifted from surprise to confusion, then to something deeper as she recognized the two figures standing in the doorway. "Ethan? Miranda?" Her voice trembled, and they could see the mixture of emotions swirling in her eyes: shock, joy, and the unmistakable pain of abandonment. "Hi, Grandma," Ethan said, stepping forward, his heart aching at the sight of her. "Can we talk?" Miranda added, her voice thick with emotion. Gladys nodded slowly, her gaze shifting between them, searching for answers in their faces. I didn't expect to see you both here." The silence that followed was heavy, and they could feel the weight of the unspoken words pressing against them. "Can we sit?" Ethan asked, motioning to the empty chairs across from her. "Of course," Gladys replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As they took their seats, the tension in the air crackled with unresolved emotions. "Grandma, Miranda began, but the words caught in her throat. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We're so sorry for what happened. For leaving you." Gladys's eyes glistened with tears. "I thought you'd forgotten me. That you didn't want me anymore." "No, that's not true," Ethan exclaimed, his heart breaking at the thought. "We were young and foolish. We didn't understand what we were doing. We made mistakes. Big ones," Miranda added, her voice trembling. "But we've thought about you every single day. I can't express how sorry I am for abandoning you, for not being there when you needed us most." Gladys looked down, her hands clasped tightly together. "It hurt. It hurt so much when you left. I felt like I had lost everything." "I know," Ethan said softly. "And we want to make it right. We've come to show you that we care. That we want to help you." At that moment, the door swung open again, and an elderly man entered the room, interrupting the emotional exchange. He paused, taking in the scene before him, and then smiled warmly. "Gladys. I was looking for you. There's a lovely group forming in the next room, and I thought you'd want to join us." Gladys smiled back, but her gaze quickly returned to her grandchildren, the weight of the moment still hanging between them. "Maybe later," she said, her voice steadying. "I'm having a conversation with my grandchildren right now." The man nodded knowingly, giving them space before he exited the room, leaving them once again enveloped in silence. "Grandma," Miranda said, her heart racing. "We love you. We want to help you make this place a home again. We want to be part of your life." Gladys looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're here now. That's what matters. Let's start anew," Ethan suggested, his voice filled with hope. "We can plan together. Make this place something special." For the first time in years, a flicker of hope. Gladys sat in the community center, surrounded by a small group of elderly individuals who had become her friends over the years. The room was filled with the soft murmur of conversations, punctuated by the laughter of those who found solace in each other's company. She gazed out the large window, watching the snowflakes dance gracefully to the ground outside. The winter wonderland seemed to mirror her own tumultuous emotions, a mix of beauty and bitterness. "Gladys, dear, would you like to share something today?" asked Helen, a sprightly woman in her 70s with a warm smile. Gladys was often the one who inspired others, and today was no different. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you, Helen. I think I do have something to say," Gladys replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. As she stood up, the room quieted, and all eyes turned towards her. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about family and what it means to truly support one another." The group leaned in, their expressions a mixture of interest and sympathy. Gladys continued, "I've had my share of struggles, as many of you know. I spent years fighting to survive on the streets, feeling abandoned and lost. But through all that darkness, I found a light within myself. It was the thought of my family that kept me going. Even when they turned away from me, I never stopped believing in the love we once shared." A soft sigh escaped from Margaret, an elderly woman who had lost her son years ago. "It's hard to forgive, Gladys. Sometimes, it feels like our hearts are too heavy with the pain. Gladys nodded, her heart aching at the truth in Margaret's words. I understand that pain all too well. I felt it when my grandchildren, Ethan and Miranda, chose to leave me. But I've learned that holding on to that pain only weighs us down. Forgiveness. It's a gift we give ourselves, not just to others. The room filled with a contemplative silence as the others reflected on her words. Gladys continued, I realized that instead of dwelling on the hurt, I want to create something beautiful from my experiences. I want to help others who are feeling lost, just like I once did. Her gaze swept over the group, and she could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. I've decided to turn our old family mansion into a shelter for the elderly. A place where people can come together, share their stories, and support one another, much like we do here. The room erupted into a chorus of surprised murmurs. That's a wonderful idea, Gladys, exclaimed Helen, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. You have such a big heart. Thank you, Gladys said, her voice thick with emotion. But I can't do it alone. I want to involve all of you in this project. We could create a community, a family, for those who have lost theirs. It would be a place of warmth and love, where no one feels abandoned. Margaret wiped a tear from her eye. I'd love to help. It's been so long since I felt needed. Me too, chimed in another elderly man named Tom, who had been quietly listening. I may not be able to do heavy lifting, but I can cook. Everyone knows I make the best chicken soup in town. Laughter bubbled up in the room, and as the tension eased, Gladys felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Exactly. Each of us has something to contribute, whether it's cooking, organizing, or just being there for someone in need. Together, we can create something beautiful. As the meeting continued, a new member joined the group. His name was Frank, a man in his late 60s who had recently moved to the area. He sat quietly in the back, observing the dynamics of the room. Gladys noticed him and gestured for him to join them. Frank, would you like to share something? We're talking about creating a shelter for the elderly, she invited warmly. Frank looked surprised but grateful for the attention. I've never been part of something like this. I lost my wife a few years ago and have been feeling quite alone since then. I'm not sure how I can help, but I'd love to be involved. Gladys's heart swelled with compassion. Just by being here, you're already making a difference. We all have stories, and sharing them can bring us closer. Together. Would you like to share your story with us? Frank hesitated, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I guess. I've just been struggling to find my place in this world without her. I miss the laughter and love we shared. It's hard to face each day alone. In that moment, Gladys saw herself in Frank's words. The pain of loss had been so familiar to her, and she felt a deep connection with him. You're not alone anymore, Frank. We're all here for each other. Let's turn our pain into purpose. As Frank began to speak, sharing memories of his wife and the life they had built together, the group listened intently. They nodded and offered words of comfort, creating an atmosphere of support and understanding. Gladys could see the healing taking place, not just for Frank but for everyone present. After the meeting, Gladys felt a renewed sense of determination. She left the community center with a plan in mind. She would transform the mansion into a safe haven, a place where individuals like Frank could find solace and companionship. It would be a sanctuary filled with laughter, warmth, and love. In the days that followed, Gladys gathered her friends from the community center to discuss the logistics of the shelter. They brainstormed ideas for the renovations, how to fund the project, and the kind of programs they could offer. We could have a book club, movie nights, and even gardening days. Helen suggested, her excitement evident. Oh, and let's not forget about arts and crafts. Margaret added eagerly. We can create a beautiful mural in the shelter, showcasing the stories of everyone who comes through its doors. Gladys smiled at the enthusiasm radiating from her friends. These are all wonderful ideas. I want this shelter to feel like home for everyone, somewhere they can truly belong. As they continued to plan, Gladys felt a sense of purpose blossoming within her. This project was more than just a shelter, it was a chance for healing, for reconnecting with the love that she had thought was lost forever. She could already envision the laughter echoing through the halls, the warmth of shared meals, and the connections that would flourish. One afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, looking through old photographs of her grandchildren, Ethan and Miranda. In each picture, she saw the joy and love that had once filled their lives. She longed to share this new chapter with them, hoping that they might come to understand her journey and the transformation she was undertaking. Maybe this will bring us back together, Gladys whispered to herself, a flicker of hope igniting in her heart. She picked up her phone, contemplating reaching out to them. But doubt crept in, and she hesitated. What if they don't want to talk to me? What if they don't care? Shaking her head, she dismissed the thoughts. No, I have to believe in the possibility of healing. I can't let fear keep me from trying. With newfound resolve, she began drafting a letter to Ethan and Miranda, sharing her plans for the shelter and inviting them to visit. She poured her heart into the words, hoping they would understand how much she had changed and how much she wished to reconnect with them. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. Regardless of the outcome, she was ready to embrace her journey of healing, both for herself and for those who would find their way to her shelter. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside, a warmth was beginning to blossom, a warmth born from love, forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings. The winter sun hung low in the sky, its feeble rays struggling to penetrate the thick blanket of snow that enveloped the once grand mansion. Ethan and Miranda stood at the entrance, staring at the faded blue door, the remnants of their childhood home. The property had been in their family for generations, a place filled with laughter and warmth, but now it felt like a ghost of its former self. I can't believe we're really selling it, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his heavy coat, seeking warmth but finding only a chill that seeped into his bones. The weight of their decision pressed heavily upon him, a burden that he couldn't shake off. Miranda shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes scanning the snow-covered yard where they had once played as children. It feels wrong, she admitted, her brow furrowing with anxiety. What are we even doing? Selling this place? Selling Grandma's home? It just doesn't feel right. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, tousling it further. We can't keep it, Miranda. It's too much. We barely come here, and it's falling apart. Besides, we need the money. His tone was practical, but underneath it lay a hint of reluctance. He, too, felt the pangs of nostalgia, but he was trying to be rational about the situation. Maybe if we had, I don't know, visited her more often, we wouldn't be in this position, she replied, feeling the familiar sting of guilt creep in. I can't stop thinking about her alone in that community center, waiting for us to show up. Ethan turned to face her, his expression shifting from frustration to understanding. I know. But what could we have done? We were busy with our lives. We thought she would be fine. And now, he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Now they were selling the last piece of her legacy. The two siblings fell into a contemplative silence, the only sound the crunching of snow beneath their boots. Miranda suddenly paused, her gaze fixed on the side of the house. Look, she said, pointing toward a window where faded curtains hung limply. She used to love sitting there, watching the snow fall. I remember her telling us stories about how she met Grandpa right there in the garden. Ethan's heart ached at the memory. He could see her, vibrant and full of life, her laughter ringing out like music. She always had the best stories, he said, a bittersweet smile creeping onto his face. Even when we were kids, she made us believe in magic. But we let her down. I just wish we could go back, Miranda whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I wish we had done more for her. Visited more often. She didn't deserve to be alone. Ethan nodded, the guilt threatening to swallow him whole. I know. But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward. He looked back at the mansion, a place filled with memories both beautiful and painful. We need to honor her by making sure this place goes to someone who will appreciate it. Miranda nodded, but the guilt lingered like a shadow. What if she finds out we sold it? What if she's hurt? Grandma hasn't seen it in years, Ethan reasoned, his voice firm. She's probably forgotten what it looked like. And besides, we can't keep holding on to the past. We have to let go. As if on cue, a gust of wind howled through the trees, sending a flurry of snow swirling around them. Miranda shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. I just wish we could talk to her. I want her to know how much she meant to us. Then let's do it, Ethan said, determination cutting through his earlier doubts. Let's go see her before the sale goes through. She deserves that. Miranda hesitated, biting her lip. Do you think she'll forgive us? I think she'll be happy to see us, he replied, offering her a reassuring smile. It's not too late. We can still make things right. With newfound resolve, the siblings climbed back into Ethan's car, the engine rumbling to life as they navigated through the snow-covered streets toward the community center. Meanwhile, at the center, Gladys sat in the common room among a group of elderly friends, her heart feeling buoyant despite the looming storm outside. She was sharing stories about her time with her grandchildren, her eyes sparkling with joy. You know, every Christmas, I would bake cookies with Ethan and Miranda. They'd sneak the dough when they thought I wasn't looking, she chuckled, the warmth of those memories wrapping around her like a cozy blanket. Children will be children, one of her friends remarked, a twinkle in her eye. But they grow up, don't they? Yes, they do, Gladys replied, her smile faltering slightly. And sometimes, they forget about those who love them. Don't say that, Gladys. They're probably just busy with their lives, another friend chimed in, trying to reassure her. You raised them well. They love you, I'm sure of it. I hope so, she murmured, her gaze drifting out the window, lost in thought. Outside, the snow continued to swirl, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. She thought of Ethan and Miranda and how much she missed them. She longed for their laughter and the warmth of their hugs. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door jolted her from her reverie. The room quieted as a staff member opened the door, revealing two familiar figures standing in the snow, their faces flushed from the cold. Ethan. Miranda. Gladys exclaimed, her heart racing with both joy and trepidation. She hadn't seen them in what felt like ages. What a surprise. Hi, Grandma, Ethan said, a nervous smile on his face as he stepped inside, shaking off the snow. Miranda followed closely behind, her hands clasped together, anxiety evident in her posture. Are you okay? I wasn't expecting you, Gladys said, her voice laced with concern as she studied their expressions. We wanted to see you, Miranda said, her voice quivering slightly. Can we talk? Of course, dear. Come sit with me, Gladys urged, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and apprehension. She gestured toward the empty chairs around her. I'm so glad you came. As they settled around her, the warmth of the room enveloped them, but the tension was palpable. What's going on? Gladys asked, sensing the weight of an unspoken truth hovering between them. Ethan exchanged a glance with Miranda, who nodded slightly. We wanted to talk about the house, he began, his voice steady yet filled with uncharacteristic hesitation. Gladys's heart sank slightly at the mention of the mansion. Oh. I see. Are you planning to sell it? Miranda looked down, unable to meet her grandmother's eyes. We've been thinking about it. It's just too much to maintain, and we haven't been there in so long. Too much. Gladys echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's been in our family for generations. It's our home. Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her arm. We know, Grandma. But we thought it would be better better for whom? Gladys interrupted, her voice rising slightly. For you. Or for me. It feels like you're abandoning me all over again. Please, listen, Miranda pleaded, her voice breaking. We're not trying to hurt you. We just thought. Maybe it would be easier this way. Easier? Gladys's heart ached as she fought against the swell of emotions rising within her. You think it's easier to sell my home? After everything? After I waited for you both for so long? Ethan glanced at Miranda, who was visibly struggling to hold back tears. We're sorry, Grandma. We should have been there for you more. We regret it every day. But we thought if we sold the house, it would help us all move on. Gladys looked at them, her heart torn between anger and longing. She wanted to forgive them, to understand, but the pain of the past still stung. You don't know what it's like to feel abandoned. To feel like you've been forgotten. I know, and we're sorry, Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity. But we want to make it right. We want to be there for you now. Miranda nodded vigorously, tears slipping down her cheeks. I miss you, Grandma. I miss us. I just want to fix things between us. The room fell silent, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Like an unspoken promise. Gladys felt a flicker of hope amidst her hurt. Maybe this was the moment they could begin to bridge the gap that had formed between them. Let's work together, she finally said, her voice calmer. Let's see if we can find a way to keep the house and make it a place for others, a haven for those who need it. Ethan's eyes widened with surprise, and Miranda's face lit up with a glimmer of hope. You mean? Like a shelter? Ethan asked, his voice filled with awe. Yes, Gladys replied. The day of the long-anticipated reunion finally arrived, and the air in the grand old mansion was thick with a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. Gladys stood in the spacious kitchen, a place that had once been the heart of family gatherings filled with laughter and warmth. Now, it felt like a museum of lost moments, a hollow echo of the life she once knew. As she stirred the rich, aromatic coffee, the steam curling up towards the ceiling, she thought about Ethan and Miranda. Would they even recognize this place, or would it only remind them of the painful past? Gladys wore her favorite floral apron, a piece that had seen better days, but it still held the essence of her culinary triumphs. She set the table with mismatched china that had survived the years, each plate telling a story of family dinners shared over laughter and love. She couldn't help but smile as she recalled the countless times she had prepared meals for her grandchildren, their faces lighting up at the sight of her famous lasagna. Now, the memories felt like bittersweet ghosts, hovering just out of reach. As she poured the coffee into delicate cups, her hands trembled slightly. The thought of seeing Ethan and Miranda again filled her with a whirlwind of emotions. Would they be angry? Apologetic? Or would they simply avoid the tough conversations altogether? Gladys took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Just be yourself, she whispered to herself, a mantra of sorts. You've faced worse. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway broke the stillness. Gladys's heart skipped a beat. They were here. She wiped her hands on the apron, took one last deep breath, and headed toward the front door, her heart pounding with each step. As she opened the door, the sight of her grandchildren sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. Ethan stood tall and weary, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, while Miranda, with her long hair blowing in the icy wind, looked hesitant, her gaze flitting nervously around the exterior of the house. The cold air wrapped around them like a shroud, but inside, a different kind of warmth lingered, one filled with unresolved feelings. Gladys, Ethan said, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension as he stepped forward. It's good to see you. Miranda nodded, biting her lip. Hi, Grandma, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Come in, come in. Gladys urged, her voice a little too enthusiastic, a little too loud in the stark silence that surrounded them. I've made coffee. I thought we could have a little chat. As they stepped inside, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around them, a comforting embrace that reminded them of better days. Gladys led them into the living room, where the large bay window framed the swirling snow outside, creating a picturesque scene. The warmth of the house contrasted sharply with the chilling winds outside, and for a moment, it felt like they were stepping into a different world, one where past grievances could fade away. Gladys gestured for them to sit down. I hope you like coffee, she said, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy atmosphere. It's strong, just the way I like it. Ethan and Miranda exchanged glances before taking their seats on the worn-out sofa. The fabric was soft but faded, a testament to the years it had endured. Gladys poured the coffee into their cups, the sound of liquid splashing against china punctuating the silence. Thank you, Miranda said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, her fingers trembling slightly. It smells amazing. Gladys smiled, but the warmth didn't quite reach her eyes. It's just coffee, dear. The real magic is in the company. She took a deep breath, trying to gauge their reactions, but the tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. It's been a while, Ethan finally said, breaking the awkward silence. How have you been, Grandma? Gladys's heart sank at the formality of his words. I've been surviving, she replied, her voice faltering for a moment. It hasn't been easy, but I've found strength in unexpected places. She couldn't help but think of the community center, the friends she had made, and the purpose she had begun to find in her life again. I've started a project, she added, trying to steer the conversation towards something positive. I want to turn this house into a shelter for the elderly. There are so many people who need help, just like I did. Miranda's eyes widened, and for a moment, it seemed as if the weight of guilt pressed down harder on her chest. That's a really good idea, she said slowly, her voice laced with surprise and admiration. I can't believe you're doing that on your own. Gladys raised her eyebrows, sensing the unspoken tension lurking beneath the surface. I'm not doing it alone. I have a community behind me now. People who care. It's been enlightening, really. She paused, looking directly at both of them. You know, it's not just about the house, but about creating a place where no one feels alone. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing at Miranda before looking back at Gladys. We're proud of you, Grandma. We really are, he said, but the sincerity felt strained. But we wanted to talk about what happened. About us leaving. Gladys's heart raced. This was the conversation she had both dreaded and anticipated. I think we need to talk about it too, she replied carefully, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But I want you both to know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about forgiveness. Forgiveness? Ethan echoed, and there was a mix of hope and fear in his tone. You mean? You've forgiven us? I've tried to, Gladys admitted. I've been working through my feelings, and I understand that you were young and scared. But it hurts, dear. It hurts a lot. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Miranda's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked down at her cup. We were scared, Grandma. We didn't know how to handle everything. We thought it would be easier for everyone if we just left. Easier? Gladys echoed, her voice rising slightly. You thought abandoning me was easier? Ethan winced. We thought no, Ethan. Gladys interrupted, her emotions bubbling to the surface. You didn't think at all. You just walked away. I was left alone, wondering what I had done wrong. It felt like a betrayal. Miranda, unable to hold back any longer, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't realize how much pain we caused you. I thought I was protecting you from our own issues. Gladys's heart softened, the ice around her feelings beginning to thaw. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, sweetheart, she said, her voice calmer now. But it's hard to reconcile that with the loneliness I felt. I've fought through so much, and I'm still fighting. I want to rebuild our relationship, but it's going to take time. Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. We want that too, Grandma. We really do. We want to be here for you, to help you with your plans. We just weren't sure how to approach you after everything. Gladys studied their faces, searching for sincerity. You have to understand, it won't be easy. Trust is fragile. And it takes work to rebuild it. But I'm willing to try if you both are. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a flicker of hope. Miranda nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. We're willing. We want to help, Grandma. We'll do whatever it takes. Gladys smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Then let's take it one step at a time. I'm glad you're here. Together, we can create something beautiful from our past. As they began to talk about the future, the warmth in the room grew. The coffee cups were filled again, and laughter began to break through the tension. With every shared story and tentative laugh, they were stepping towards healing, one conversation at a time. The snow continued to swirl outside, but within the walls of the mansion, a new beginning was taking shape. As the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the grand yet empty dining room of the mansion, Gladys felt a swirl of emotions tugging at her heart. The table, adorned with a simple white tablecloth, was set for three, the delicate china contrasting sharply with the weight of her past. She glanced at the clock, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the steaming liquid into three mismatched cups. Each cup held memories, some warm and comforting, others bitter and cold. Today was the day she had longed for and dreaded in equal measure. When the sound of hesitant footsteps echoed through the hallway, Gladys's heart raced. She wiped her palms against her skirt, trying to steady herself. The door creaked open, and in walked Ethan and Miranda, their faces a mixture of apprehension and sadness. They had changed since the last time she saw them, older, perhaps, but still her grandchildren. The years of separation hung heavily in the air like an unspoken barrier. Hi, Grandma, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked around the room, taking in the faded grandeur of the mansion that had once been their family home. It's nice to be back. Gladys forced a smile, her heart aching at the sight of them. Welcome home, she replied softly, gesturing for them to take a seat. I made coffee. I thought we could talk. Miranda settled into her chair with a sigh, her gaze drifting to the window where snowflakes danced in the chilly breeze. It's beautiful out there, she murmured, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm that usually accompanied such a statement. It was as if the beauty of the winter landscape was overshadowed by the weight of their shared past. Gladys poured the coffee, the sound of liquid filling the cups breaking the silence that had enveloped them. She could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. I know this is difficult, she began, searching for the right words. But I want us to talk about what happened. About why you left. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting away from hers. We were young, Grandma. We didn't understand. We thought we were doing what was best for us, for you. For me. Gladys echoed, the pain evident in her voice. You thought leaving me alone in that small apartment was what was best for me. I felt abandoned. I felt like I had lost my entire world. Miranda's eyes glistened with unshed tears. We were scared, Grandma. We didn't know how to help you. We thought it would be easier for everyone if we just left. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. But it wasn't easier. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Gladys looked at her granddaughter, a flood of empathy washing over her. I understand that now, Miranda. But at the time, I felt so lost. I still remember the day you both walked out. It was like a part of me died that day. I was alone in a world that felt cold and unforgiving. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. We didn't mean to hurt you, Grandma. We were just kids, and everything felt so overwhelming. We thought you didn't need us anymore. Gladys shook her head slowly. You were my lifeline. I needed you. More than ever. After your mother passed, I was left with nothing but memories and the echoes of laughter that once filled this house. I wanted to share my life with you. I wanted you to know how much you meant to me. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled in. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and regret. Miranda wiped a tear from her cheek and looked at her brother. Ethan, we should have been there for her. We should have at least tried. Ethan nodded, his expression turning serious. You're right. We were selfish. I thought I could just move on and forget about everything, but I couldn't. I've carried this guilt with me for so long. It eats at me every day. Gladys watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of love and sorrow. I know that now. I've had a long time to think about it, to understand both sides. Life has a way of teaching us painful lessons. But I want you to know that I forgive you. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. You were just trying to find your way. Miranda looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. You forgive us? She whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, Gladys replied, her tone steady. But forgiveness doesn't mean that everything is okay. It takes time to heal. I've spent years in pain, wondering why you both left me. I've felt the coldness of abandonment, and it has shaped who I am today. Ethan's brow furrowed as he listened. We can't change the past, but we want to help you now. We want to be part of your life again, to make things right. I want to support you in turning this place into the shelter you've dreamed of. I want to help make a difference for others who are alone like you were. Gladys felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. You really mean that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The idea of working together on something meaningful brought a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Absolutely, Ethan affirmed. We've both realized that family is everything. We can't erase the past, but we can build a future together. Miranda nodded, her eyes shining with determination. We can start fresh. We can create a place where no one has to feel alone. We can be a family again. As the conversation flowed, Gladys shared more about her experiences after they left. She spoke of the nights spent in the cold, of the people she met who had stories similar to hers, and of the hope that had flickered within her, even during the darkest times. It was hard, but I learned a lot about resilience and the importance of community, she explained. I want this shelter to reflect that. I want it to be a safe haven where people can find support and companionship. Ethan and Miranda listened intently, their expressions shifting from guilt to admiration. They were witnessing a side of their grandmother they had never fully understood: her strength, her determination, and her unwavering love. Grandma, you're incredible, Miranda said, her voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. I didn't realize how much you had to endure. Gladys smiled, her heart swelling with pride. You're both incredible too. We've all made mistakes, but it's what we do moving forward that matters most. Let's make this place a beacon of hope for others. Tears streamed down Miranda's cheeks, and she reached across the table, grasping her grandmother's hand. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I wish I could take back the pain we caused you. Gladys squeezed her hand gently, her heart full. You can't change the past, but you can change the future. Let's work on this together. In that moment, the three of them began to weave a new tapestry of connection, forgiveness, and hope. The past was a part of them, but it didn't have to define their future. As the snow continued to fall outside, the warmth of their conversation filled the air, promising a new beginning for their family, a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to embrace the love that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Gladys stood in her grand yet slightly weathered kitchen, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The large wooden table was set for three, the fine china gleaming under the soft glow of the pendant lights. She had spent the morning preparing for this moment, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her as she thought about Ethan and Miranda's impending arrival. Today was the day they would finally confront the past, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. As she poured steaming coffee into delicate cups, she glanced out of the kitchen window, watching the snowflakes fall gently outside, their descent a beautiful yet melancholic reminder of the distance that had grown between her and her grandchildren. She remembered the last time they had been together, the joy, the laughter, and then the heart-wrenching goodbye. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was not only a reunion, it was a chance for healing, a step toward rebuilding the broken bonds of their family. A soft knock on the door snapped her back to reality. It was time. With her heart racing, she wiped her hands on a dish towel, took a moment to gather her thoughts, and opened the door. Ethan stood there, tall and slightly imposing, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, while Miranda stood a step behind him, her expression a mixture of apprehension and guilt. The sight of them sent a rush of conflicting emotions through Gladys. She felt a pang of love mixed with the lingering pain of abandonment. "Hi, Grandma," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble as he stepped inside, shaking off the cold. Miranda followed, her gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding Gladys's eyes. "Hello, my dears," Gladys replied, forcing a warm smile despite the tightness in her throat. "I've made some coffee. Please, come in and sit down." They shuffled into the living room, the tension palpable as they took their seats at the table. Gladys poured the coffee, the sound of liquid filling the cups breaking the silence that hung heavily in the air. She could sense the weight of unspoken words between them, thick and suffocating. "Thank you for inviting us," Miranda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper as she wrapped her hands around the cup. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the familiar surroundings, memories flooding back unbidden. Gladys nodded, her heart aching at the sight of her granddaughter so visibly distressed. "I thought it would be nice to catch up, to talk about everything that's happened." She looked directly at Ethan and then at Miranda, gauging their reactions. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Yeah, we need to talk about the past. About why we left you." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the facade of confidence he tried to maintain. Gladys's heart ached at the admission. "I've thought about that day often," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The day you both walked out of my life. It felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me." Miranda's gaze finally met Gladys's, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. We were so young, and we didn't know how to handle everything. We thought it was best for you to have space, but I see now how wrong we were." Gladys felt a surge of emotion at Miranda's words. "I understand that you were scared, both of you. But the abandonment, it hurt more than I can say." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I spent years wondering what I did wrong, where I failed you." Ethan frowned, the guilt etched on his face. "You didn't fail us. We failed you. We were selfish and didn't think about how our actions would affect you." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "I wish we could take it back." "Wishing doesn't change anything," Gladys said gently, her heart softening as she watched the remorse wash over them. "But I want you both to know that I've forgiven you. It took time, but I've learned that holding on to anger only poisons the soul." Miranda gasped lightly, her hand covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You've forgiven us? After everything?" "Yes," Gladys replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Forgiveness is part of healing. It doesn't mean I don't feel the pain, but I refuse to let it define us anymore." Ethan reached for Miranda's hand, squeezing it for support. "I don't know how we can ever repay you for the hurt we caused, but we want to help. We want to be part of your life again." Gladys studied them, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and caution. "I want that too. But healing will take time. There are scars that need mending." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I believe we can do it together." "Together," Miranda echoed, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to make it right. We want to make it right." Gladys smiled through her tears, feeling the warmth of hope beginning to bloom in her heart. "Then let's start by working together on the mansion. I have plans to turn it into a shelter for the elderly, a place where people can find community and support just like I found here." Ethan's eyes lit up, and he nodded vigorously. "We can help you with that. I have some experience with renovations, and Miranda can handle the organizing. We'll do this together, Grandma." Gladys felt a surge of gratitude as she witnessed the determination in their eyes. "I would love that. It would mean so much to me to have you both involved in something that is so close to my heart." As they began to discuss the details of the renovations, the initial tension in the room slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. They laughed and reminisced about old memories, the coffee and pastries forgotten as they lost themselves in conversation. But as they spoke, Gladys felt a flicker of uncertainty. The path ahead was still uncertain, and while she was filled with hope, she knew there would be challenges. The scars of the past would take time to heal, and they would need to navigate their new relationship delicately. "Before we proceed," Gladys said, her tone turning serious again, "I want us to promise each other something." She looked at both of them intently. "No more secrets. If we're going to rebuild our family, we need to be honest with each other, no matter how painful it is." Ethan and Miranda exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "We promise," Ethan said firmly. "No more secrets." "I promise too," Miranda added, her voice steady. "We'll face everything together, no matter how hard it gets." Gladys smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Then let's begin this journey together. We can create something beautiful out of our past." As they delved into planning the renovations, the atmosphere in the room shifted from one of tension to one of collaboration and hope. Each suggestion was met with enthusiasm, and for the first time in years, Gladys felt a sense of family warmth enveloping her once again. The coffee grew cold, but they didn't care. They were building a new foundation, brick by brick, with laughter, love, and a promise of a future filled with understanding and connection. In that moment, Gladys knew that despite the long road ahead, they had taken the first crucial step toward healing, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The air inside the once grand mansion felt different now, an electric buzz of possibility mingling with the remnants of the past. As Gladys, Ethan, and Miranda stood in the spacious but dusty living room, sunlight streamed through the tall, grimy windows, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chill of their emotions. Old wooden beams crisscrossed above them, and the echoes of laughter from years gone by seemed to whisper around them. Gladys looked at her grandchildren, a mix of hope and apprehension swirling within her. "So, where do we begin?" she asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. Ethan cleared his throat, glancing around the room. "I guess we should start with the basics," he suggested. "We need to sketch out a plan. What do you envision for this place, Grandma?" Gladys smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I want it to be a haven for the elderly. A place where they can feel safe, where they can find community again." She paused, her gaze drifting to the empty fireplace, the memories of warm gatherings flooding back. "This house was filled with love once, and I want to bring that back. We can renovate the living room into a common area, add cozy seating, maybe even a small library. Miranda nodded, her heart swelling with pride. That sounds perfect. We can also create a garden in the backyard. A place where everyone can relax and enjoy the fresh air. It'd be a great way for them to connect with nature. Gladys' heart soared at the enthusiasm in Miranda's voice. Yes. A garden would be wonderful. It can be a space for activities, a place for them to gather and share stories. Just like we used to. Do you think we'll have enough money for all this? Ethan interjected, a hint of doubt creeping into his tone. He had faced financial struggles himself, and the weight of responsibility felt heavy on his shoulders. Gladys placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We will find a way. I've been saving for years. It won't be easy, but we can reach out to the community for support. There are people who care. And besides, she added with a twinkle in her eye, we have each other. Ethan chuckled softly, the tension in the room easing slightly. You're right, Grandma. Together, we can make it happen. As they discussed their plans, the atmosphere in the room shifted to one of collaboration and shared purpose. They pulled out paper and pens, sketching ideas and jotting down notes. Laughter and animated chatter filled the once silent space, the sound of rekindled bonds echoing off the walls. However, just as they began to feel a sense of unity, a sharp knock resounded through the house, jolting them from their creative flow. The sound echoed ominously in the stillness of the mansion. Who could that be? Miranda asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Gladys exchanged a wary glance with Ethan before moving toward the door. I'll check, she said, her voice firm but laced with curiosity. She opened the door to find a mail carrier standing there, a letter in hand. Is this the residence of Gladys Turner? The mail carrier asked, eyeing her with a mix of professionalism and concern. Yes, it is, Gladys replied, taking the letter from him. Thank you. The carrier nodded and walked away, leaving Gladys standing in the doorway, the envelope feeling unusually heavy in her hands. She turned back to Ethan and Miranda, her heart sinking as she caught their concerned expressions. What's wrong, Grandma? Ethan asked, stepping forward. I don't know yet, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She tore open the envelope, and as she unfolded the letter, her brow furrowed deeper with each line she read. The words blurred momentarily as a wave of emotion washed over her. Gladys, Miranda urged, what does it say? Gladys looked up, her eyes wide, disbelief etched on her face. It's about our family, she stammered, her voice trembling. There are secrets here. Things we didn't know. What kind of secrets? Ethan pressed, his voice tightening as he moved closer, attempting to read over her shoulder. It says. She hesitated, taking a deep breath. It says that one of you is not biologically related to my daughter. One of you was adopted. A heavy silence descended upon the room, the air thick with tension. Miranda's face paled, and Ethan's jaw dropped in shock. What? He exclaimed, taking a step back. That can't be true. Gladys' heart raced as she saw the pain and confusion in their eyes. I don't know if it's true, but this letter claims that one of you was adopted after my daughter married. It never even crossed my mind. I don't know how to process this. Who wrote this? Miranda asked, her voice shaking slightly. And why now? Gladys shook her head, feeling the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her. There's no signature. Just these revelations. It could be a cruel joke, but it feels too real. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. We need to find out the truth. I can't believe this. It feels like everything we've built so far is crumbling. Gladys felt her heart ache at the sight of their distress. Please, let's not jump to conclusions. We can talk to your mother. She might know something about this. Miranda shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. But what if she doesn't? What if everything we thought we knew is a lie? Gladys stepped forward, taking both their hands in hers, grounding them in the moment. Whatever the truth is, we will face it together. We've come too far to let fear tear us apart again. This house is meant to be a place of healing, for all of us. And we can't let old wounds dictate our future. Ethan nodded slowly, his resolve strengthening. You're right, Grandma. We owe it to ourselves to confront this. But we also need to be prepared for whatever we find. We can't let it destroy what we've started. Miranda wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Okay. Let's find out what this is all about. We'll uncover the truth together. Gladys squeezed their hands, feeling a flicker of hope in the darkness. Together. Always. As they stood there in the living room, a sense of determination began to replace the confusion and fear, but the weight of the letter still loomed over them like a dark cloud, reminding them that their journey was far from over. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, they felt ready to face it together. Gladys stood in the grand foyer of the mansion, her heart racing as she clutched the letter tightly in her hand. The paper felt heavy with the weight of the secrets it contained, secrets that had the potential to unravel everything she had begun to rebuild with Ethan and Miranda. The once vibrant room, filled with echoes of laughter and warmth, now felt cold and desolate as the tension hung thick in the air. Gladys, what's wrong? Ethan asked, his brow furrowed with concern. He shifted nervously from one foot to the other, glancing at Miranda, who stood beside him, her face pale. Gladys took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I received this letter, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She held it out to them, her fingers brushing the envelope's faded edges. It speaks of things I never knew, things about our family. Miranda's eyes widened in alarm as she took a step closer, peering at the letter. What does it say? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It reveals secrets. Lies that have been buried for too long, Gladys replied, her tone heavy. She felt the pulse of anxiety thrumming in her chest, the words she had yet to speak clinging to her throat like bitter bile. It says that one of you is not who you think you are. What do you mean? Ethan interjected, his voice rising in disbelief. That doesn't make any sense. We're family. Gladys shook her head, the sorrow of years spent apart rushing back. The letter claims that one of you was adopted. That you, Ethan, are not my daughter's biological son, she confessed, her voice cracking under the strain of the revelation. It makes me question everything. The love we thought was unconditional, the bonds we believed to be unbreakable. Miranda stepped back, her hand covering her mouth as shock washed over her features. No, that can't be true, she murmured, her mind racing. You must be mistaken. We've always known we were a family. Maybe that's what we've always been led to believe, Gladys said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. But if this letter is true, then what does it mean for us? What does it mean for the love I thought I had for you both? Ethan clenched his fists, his expression hardening. This is ridiculous. Just because someone sends a letter doesn't mean it's true. We can't let some stranger's words tear us apart. But what if it is true? Miranda's voice broke, and her eyes shimmered with tears. What if everything we thought we knew about our family is a lie? She turned to Gladys, desperation etched on her face. Please, you have to believe us. We love you. That hasn't changed. Gladys felt a pang in her heart as she looked at Miranda's tear-streaked face, but the doubt lingered in her mind. Love is not enough when the foundation of that love is built on falsehoods, she said softly. I don't want to lose you both again, but I can't ignore what this letter says. Ethan took a step closer, his voice firm yet pained. We can figure this out together. We can find the truth behind the letter. We can't let this drive a wedge between us. He reached out, his hand resting gently on Gladys's arm, a gesture of reassurance. Gladys met his gaze, searching for the sincerity she had always seen in him. "How can I trust you after everything that's happened?" she asked, her voice quivering. "You both left me when I needed you most. How do I know this is not just another attempt to placate me?" Miranda stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "We were scared and confused, Gladys. We didn't know how to handle everything that was happening. But we've changed. We've grown. We want to make things right." Her voice was filled with passion and desperation, as if every word were a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. "Change takes time," Gladys replied, her heart aching. "You can't expect me to forget the pain of your absence overnight. I've been alone for so long. You don't know what it was like for me out there." Ethan's expression softened, the anger ebbing away. "We do know, Gladys. We saw the impact of our choices. We felt the emptiness of our lives without you. I wish we could turn back time, but we can't. All we can do is move forward and face the truth, whatever it may be." Gladys stared at them, the turmoil of emotions twisting within her. She wanted to believe them, to grasp onto the hope that they could rebuild their relationship despite the revelations of the past. "If we're going to do this, we need to confront the truth together," she finally said, her voice steady. "I won't shy away from what this letter has uncovered, and neither should you." "Agreed," Ethan said, nodding. "We'll find out what really happened. We'll talk to the family members who might know more. We owe it to ourselves to uncover the truth." "But what if it hurts?" Miranda asked, her voice wavering slightly. "What if the truth is too painful to bear?" Gladys looked into Miranda's eyes, seeing the fear that flickered there. "Pain is a part of healing. We can't avoid it. But we can face it together. I want to understand our family, and that includes all the messy truths." Ethan glanced at Miranda, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. "We can do this," he said resolutely, squeezing her hand. "We will face whatever comes our way, as a family. No more secrets, no more lies." Gladys felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to navigate the storm together. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her chest begin to ease. "Then let's start now. Let's figure out who we are, who we've been, and who we can still become." As they stood in the foyer, united in their determination, the shadows of the past loomed large but felt a little less daunting. They had a long way to go, but the first step toward healing had been taken, a step toward understanding, forgiveness. And, most importantly, love. The winter air was thick with tension as Gladys sat in the grand living room of the mansion, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fireplace. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the cold dread that had settled in her heart after reading the anonymous letter. The words swirled in her mind like the snowstorm outside, each sentence a chilling revelation that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of connection she had begun to weave with Ethan and Miranda. "Grandma, are you okay?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back from the edge of despair. He and Miranda stood at the threshold of the room, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. Gladys took a deep breath, her heart racing. She had been preparing for this moment, the moment when she would confront them about the letter that had upended her understanding of their family. I just received something," she stammered, the weight of the words heavy on her tongue. "Something that changes everything." "What do you mean?" Miranda asked, her brow furrowing with worry. "What did it say?" Gladys held up the letter, her hands trembling slightly. It says that one of you isn't actually the biological child of your mother." The words hung in the air, a heavy silence following them. Ethan's face paled. "What? That can't be true. Who would say something like that?" "I don't know, but it's here, in black and white," Gladys replied, her voice steadying as she felt the surge of protective instinct for her family. "It says that one of you was adopted, and no one ever told me. I need to know the truth. I deserve that much. Miranda's eyes widened, and she instinctively reached for Ethan's hand. Why would someone write that? It doesn't make any sense. Mom would have told us if there was something to know. Gladys watched as Ethan's face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. This is ridiculous. Who would even know that? It's just some sick joke. Ethan, Gladys interrupted gently, this is serious. It could explain a lot of things. The secrets, the distance. It might be the reason for the rift in our family. Ethan shook his head vehemently, his frustration bubbling to the surface. No, Grandma. I won't believe it until I see proof. This is just cruel. Miranda, however, was silent, her mind racing as she processed the implications. What if it's true, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. What if one of us? Stop it. Ethan snapped, turning towards her. You can't just accept this nonsense. It's not right to jump to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions? Gladys interjected, her voice rising slightly as she struggled to maintain her composure. Ethan, you need to understand that this could be a part of our history that we've been kept in the dark about. It's not just about you or Miranda, it's about our entire family. Then let's find out, Miranda said quietly, surprising both Gladys and Ethan with the determination in her voice. We need to talk to Mom. She might know something. Gladys nodded, a flicker of hope igniting within her. That's a good idea, Miranda. We need to face this together. Whatever the truth is, we can't let it tear us apart again. They all turned towards the large window, watching the snowflakes dance in the wind, each flake a reminder of the cold secrets that had been buried for too long. The mansion, once a symbol of abandonment, was now filled with the warmth of possibility, if only they could navigate the storm of emotions threatening to consume them. Let's sit down and figure this out, Gladys suggested, her heart racing with a mix of apprehension and resolution. They moved to the large dining table, the remnants of their earlier coffee still present, a stark contrast to the emotional weight that now filled the room. As they settled into their seats, Gladys looked at her grandchildren, seeing the fear and uncertainty etched on their faces. No matter what we discover, I want you both to know that I love you. That won't change. Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. But what if this changes everything? What if we've been living a lie? Gladys reached out, her hand hovering over the table. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it can also heal. We need to face it together. Okay, Miranda said, her voice steadier now, but we need to approach this carefully. We can't just confront Mom without understanding everything first. As they began to discuss their next steps, a sense of unity began to form amidst the chaos of uncertainty. They decided to call their mother, and as the phone rang, Gladys felt a knot tightening in her stomach. Mom, it's us, Miranda said as soon as her mother answered. We need to talk. There's something important we've discovered. Is everything okay? Their mother's voice came through the line, laced with concern. Not really, Ethan interjected, his voice firm. We received a letter. It says one of us is adopted, and we need to know the truth. There was a long pause on the other end, and Gladys could almost hear her daughter's mind racing. What? That's a lot to unpack. Can we talk in person? Of course, Gladys replied, her heart pounding as they arranged to meet. As they hung up, silence enveloped the room, each of them lost in their thoughts. Do you think she'll tell us? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hope so, Gladys replied. But we have to be prepared for whatever she says. No matter how painful. The hours dragged on as they awaited their mother's arrival. Gladys busied herself with preparations, setting the table and lighting candles, hoping to create an atmosphere of warmth and safety. But her heart felt heavy, the weight of the letter still looming over them. When the doorbell finally rang, it felt like the world had paused. Gladys exchanged a glance with Ethan and Miranda, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. "Let me get it," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. As she opened the door, she was met with the familiar face of her daughter, though today it was lined with worry. "Mom," she said, stepping inside and wrapping her arms around Gladys. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this." "Come in," Gladys urged, stepping aside to let her in. "We've been waiting for you." They all gathered around the table, the tension palpable as they waited for their mother to speak. "I don't know how to begin," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But I never meant for you to find out this way." "Just tell us the truth," Ethan said, his voice steady but with an underlying urgency. Their mother took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When I was younger, I had to make some difficult choices. One of them was to put up a child for adoption. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel less loved or less important." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling heavily in the air. "Wait," Miranda said, her voice rising in disbelief. "So one of us is adopted? But who?" Their mother looked down, visibly shaken. "It's you, Miranda. You were adopted." Miranda felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. "What? How could you not tell me? This changes everything. Please understand," her mother pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to protect you. I thought it was for the best." Gladys reached out, her heart aching for both her daughter and granddaughter. "We need to talk about this. All of us. Because no matter what, we're still family." Miranda's expression softened as she looked at Gladys, the love in her eyes shining through the chaos. "But what if I don't feel like I belong anymore?" "You belong to us, Miranda," Gladys said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "No matter how you came to be a part of this family, you are loved. And love can overcome any secret." Ethan, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "This doesn't change my feelings for you, Miranda. I might be confused and hurt, but you're still my sister." The room filled with an overwhelming sense of unity as they embraced one another, tears flowing but hearts beginning to heal. "Maybe this is our chance," Gladys said, her voice filled with determination. "To start fresh. To redefine what family means to us." As they sat together, the warmth of the fire crackling in the background, the storm outside began to subside. The snowflakes danced gently against the window, a reminder that even in the coldest of winters, the promise of spring was always just around the corner. "Let's work on this together," Miranda said, her voice strong. "We can face whatever comes next as a family." And as they began to share their fears, hopes, and dreams, Gladys realized that despite the pain of the past, they were indeed ready for a new beginning, one that was wrapped in love.